Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first official podcast of Books Not Bars. I'm Joe.
I'm Bryson.
And I'm Gabby.
So, if you've seen our trailer, that's a bit of an introduction to what we're going to be doing on the podcast. So, firstly, we're just going to talk about what is Bahrain, what the audience knows about Bahrain, and the geographical location of Bahrain, and what's happening in Bahrain. So, what's been happening since the introduction of the monarchy, previous protests, as well as the uprising in 2011, and also the cultural and legal dynamics of academic freedom in Bahrain. So firstly, we're going to talk about what we know about Bahrain. So what is Bahrain, Bryson?
Well, I think when anyone talks about Bahrain, the first thing they always come to is the
Formula One.
Yeah, the Formula
Yeah,
One, the
F1.
GP. But that's obviously pretty easy. Well, wasn't the Formula One actually the first Formula One in the Arab Springs? Oh, not Arab Springs, the Gulf,
In the Gulf States.
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest races of the year.
Yeah, well, it's usually near the start of the calendar year, so a lot of people know about it. If you've got the F1 video game or you watch F1, you'd know about the Bahrain race.
Yeah, I don't even watch F1 and I knew about the Bahrain.
And because obviously Bahrain has a pretty small population, only has 940,000 people, so it's not a famous country, but people know it through F1. So a lot of people might have a pretty positive view of what Bahrain is, but obviously since we're on the podcast, there's obviously a lot of ethical dilemmas that we need to talk about.
Yeah, that's just a pretty obvious sports washing. You know, we're seeing it a lot more now with Saudi Arabia and the football and all the money.
So what is sports washing?
Sports washing is pretty much just how a state, usually an authoritarian state like the Gulf ones, like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE, like Bahrain, use sport as a way to almost cover up their human rights abuses and all the bad things. Like, I know in Qatar, the World Cup that happened in Qatar in 2022, the amount of migrant workers' deaths that happened to build those stadiums. But it still went through just because everyone loves the World Cup. Everyone loves football.
Yeah, right.
And so it just covers up what's actually happening in those states.
So do you reckon it's kind of modern propaganda to the outside world to show what what Bahrain is, what you think of Bahrain? We probably have positive views before we actually went into research on it.
And even just the fact of money, so it's plays such a big role that in terms of trade, a lot of states are reliant on Bahrain as well. So with sports washing and trade, they have a lot of power to cover up the human rights issues that are happening.
Yeah, the USA has a military base in Bahrain. They're close allies with Bahrain. The UK have also close allies. You know, I'm pretty sure the last time in 2021, the Bahraini and the British monarchy actually met up.
Yeah, and we have a good trade relationship with Bahrain too.
And I'm sure if a lot of people found out what's actually happening in Bahrain, not that it's a great state, it has an F1 race, it's beautiful, there's human rights, that people actually find out what's happening, the whole trade relations people would be a lot more against the relations that Australia, America, and England obviously have with Bahrain. Anyway, let's get on to the government structure of Bahrain. So what is the monarchy in Bahrain? Who's in control? Anyone want to kick us off?
Well, Bahrain initially gained independence in 1971 from the British. And only in 2002 did the king, the emir declared himself as king. And so his name is King Hamad bin Isa al Khalifa, and he's been the king ever since 2002.
And is there anything to do with has he got any family members also in government?
Yeah, so he's elected the prime minister. Well, before this prime minister, the current one, the previous prime minister held the role for over 50 years, and it was actually the longest prime minister term, unelected term in history. And this also just extends to his ministers, the high court, the parliaments, just all the major roles in the Bahrain monarchy and the Bahrain political sphere is built upon the king and his influence.
So the Al Khalifa family is obviously very rich. Is there much like separation between like wealthy people and poor people in Bahrain? Like, do you reckon there's lots of wealthy people, a big drop off? Because obviously, if I look at the GDP per capita in Bahrain, it's actually quite high because it's kind of like similar to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. There's oil and there's obviously lots of rich families, but at the other end of the spectrum, there's also a lot of poor people.
Well, this inequality is really built upon the difference between Sunni and Shiites in Bahrain. So the majority demographic in Bahrain are Shiites, but the ruling class are Sunni Muslims, and this has created an excuse for systemic like dominance and just violence against the Shia population.
Can you maybe like go into a little bit more detail on the Shia population, just for like the average listener who isn't aware of these groups of people?
So the Shiites, Muslims, and the Sunnis, they're branches of Islam, and whilst Bahrain is majority Shiite, the Sunni majority have been importing foreign Sunnis into the country to like change this demographic in favor of the king, and for him to gain more power and acceptance within society, because that is the main reason that the Bahraini uprising in 2011 really started. It gave people reasons to uprise, and why they weren't happy was because how they were mistreated due to their religion.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And obviously the Bahrain uprising in 2011 is one of the key points of like the turning of people realizing that, hold on, we don't have democratic rights within the country. And that was one of the main protests for democratic rights. And that was led by a lot of key figures it was more like early in social media. But how were these people silenced, the people who were appealing and leading the masses to protest in the Bahrain uprising?
Yeah, well, let's just say that this didn't start in 2011. Like, our person of interest, Abdul Jalil Al Singace, was first arrested in 2009 for similar reasons of challenging the monarchy and the undemocratic actions against the Shiite Muslims. So in 2011, this was really just a culmination of grievances that have happened.
But it was also
over
a
the
wave across the Middle East.
Yeah.
Like the Arab Spring took place in so many different countries, and Bahrain was one of them. But it was a big turning point in Bahrain as well, because this is when a lot of activists were arrested at this time because of the protests. And for example, around this time, the government in Bahrain, or the regime, they declared a state of emergency for a period. And what they did actually was, in their constitution, it basically says that civilians can't be tried in the military court, but they changed this through declaring a state of emergency. So Dr. Al Singace, as well as others, were actually tried in the military court, which is technically unconstitutional. So during this time, by declaring a state of emergency, they were able to get away with a lot in terms of imprisoning and silencing a lot of these activists.
Because a lot of the crimes that like Al Singace and other scholars and people, activists, a lot of the crimes they wouldn't be crimes in other countries, and written in the Bahraini constitution, they're not actually crimes. So how did they get away with jailing people? Was there specific laws that they could bypass due to the politics of power?
Well, I think that just comes back to the dominance that the monarchy has in the judicial system and other ministries, where they're able to exert their influence unconstitutionally, because the king has made himself a king. He is above the prime minister. He's above there is no rule of law. So when these people were arrested, they didn't have the support of a judicial system to be able to have proper defenses and proper rights. So yeah.
And even during from when Dr. Alcin Gace was imprisoned, he did not get a fair trial. He was not properly given time to meet with his lawyer. I guess the system is so intertwined that there isn't this separate judicial system or separation of powers per se. There was a lot of issues. And I guess the charge against him was trying to overthrow the government. So it's it's an interesting charge. They've just kind of labelled him as that and just thrown him in jail and used all their control to keep him there.
Yeah. So another example is Khalil al-Hawachi, who I've extensively researched, and he was imprisoned from 2014 to 2022 for peacefully protesting for democratic reform, and his house was raided, and he was actually charged with possession of a weapon, even though according to al-Hawachi this was completely fabricated, and the real reason was actually for peaceful activism. And obviously we can't tell if this is true or not because it's all hearsay, but it's pretty clear that they are willing to make up charges or use very vague laws in order to imprison scholars for anyone even posing a threat to the current monarchy regime. All right, let's go back to 2011 when the Bahrain uprising was happening.
Yeah, so obviously in 2011 we had the Arab Spring protests happening across the Middle East, and Bahrain was one of the countries that was involved, and they had the Bahraini uprising. We were talking a little bit earlier about social media and the impact this had on the Arab Spring and how it really made the world aware of what was happening and how this hadn't necessarily happened before. I guess, with all the conflict that's gone on in the Middle East, it was really important that this was reported on and people were aware, and that's how it was able to move across the region. What were some of the big reasons behind the Arab Spring and Bahraini uprising specifically?
So as previously mentioned, the Bahraini uprising of 2011, it sprung from the Shia and Sunni divide. As we previously mentioned, as the Sunnis were the majority and the Shiites were being discriminated against. They were discriminated against the ability to own homes, get jobs, be let into certain places, get an education, stuff like this. And this often fueled the fire, which would have come in 2011. And also the way that this monarchy actually imported Sunnis from other areas as well, just made this a lot worse, and is why we saw such a steep response and such a volatile response from the Bahraini government against the Bahraini population.
Yeah, because I guess it exposed a lot of these things to the world that they'd kind of been sweeping under the rug a little bit, and just all the institutionalized discrimination and the censorship as well. Which kind of leads into a little bit about academic freedom, and what's happening in Bahrain.
Yes, but also one thing to also consider was the outer context of the Gulf region. So the way that the Bahraini government actually was able to quell this uprising was their ability to connect with other Gulf states and their good connections with states such as Saudi Arabia. So I'm pretty sure it was the GEC cooperation that had a deal where the Saudis actually sent troops and sent trucks to Bahrain in order to quell this uprising due to fears that this would spread within their own borders. And that's what the Saudi government was also very scared about.
So, there you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to add, I guess, more in the realm of academic freedom. There was also a lot of censorship already happening, as that was one of the reasons. Around 2012, there were a lot of reports to Education International, which is a organisation. They were receiving a lot of requests from academics and students who were being silenced. There was a lot of academic infringements. They were being sentenced to up to 15 years in prison, which is really concerning. In 2012, more than 400 Bahraini students were actually expelled, and at least 117 staff members because they were participating in these anti-government demonstrations or posting it on social media. So yeah, they're very quick to take action just to stop it, like harsh consequences immediately, just to stop it.
They were very quick to take actions, more importantly, against their own people.
Yeah.
Which is one of the most horrific things about this uprising was the willingness of the monarchy to kill their own citizens.
So many deaths.
So many deaths no one was sentenced, no one was imprisoned because of them, and they were often just done on the side because of the excuse that they were trying to fight it or start a revolution against the government when they were just asking for better democratic rights and freedom of expression and academic freedom.
Yeah, and a lot of these protests started pretty peaceful, but yeah, they would just respond with such violence. Yeah,
so this is also, the peacefulness is exemplified by the Pearl Roundabout, which is honestly now, well, it's not now because the monarchy destroyed the monument, but it was seen as a symbol for the Bahraini people, a symbol of hope, and where they were together during the uprising, and many of the deaths were caused in the Pearl Roundabout.
So just what is the Pearl Roundabout? Where is it in Bahrain?
So the Pearl Roundabout is in the capital of, sorry, my pronunciation is not good, but like Manea?
Yep.
And it's just a roundabout where the people express their concerns. For one of the first times, they were able to express their concerns and about the limits of their freedoms. Yep. They were able to speak freely in this roundabout, and they were sleeping there. There was food trucks there. People gave them aid. And when the Saudis came in for the intervention and for the suppression, this Pearl Roundabout became a symbol which the Bahraini and Saudi government couldn't stand. So that's why it was ultimately destroyed.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the implications of the 2011 uprising. What has changed since all the academics and scholars have been jailed? Do you reckon there's a case of self-censorship, people speaking out less? I know that when we were trying to research people to potentially interview in Bahrain, there was a lot. It was very hard to find Twitter accounts because people were very secretive due to all the previous stories that have come out from the jail prison in Bahrain and all the shocking stories of people getting imprisoned for very little, not even wrong activity, just activist activity. So do you reckon that the 2011 uprising has caused a domino effect in the wrong direction in regards to self-censorship?
Yeah, well, because the main goal of the Bahraini uprising was to get these rights, to get these freedoms of freedom of expression. And now, if you look at Bahrain today, it's ultimately hasn't made any progress, or some may even say it's gone in reverse because of the threats that now the government are willing to take to ensure that the people of Bahrain aren't able to express their opinions about the government in any dissenting way.
Yeah.
And I feel like the 2011 uprising, it's informed the world about what's going on, and there's a lot of international advocacy for imprisoned scholars and human rights in Bahrain, but internally, the people aren't really able to do much because the threat of imprisonment and violence is so extreme and so scary that, I think there's a lot of self-censorship within Bahrain, even though the world knows that not much has really been done to help them.
Thanks, Bryson and Gabby. That was a really good conversation we had about Bahrain, academic freedom, the uprising, and many other topics. Tune in next time. We'll talk about Dr. Al Singais in more detail. Thank you guys so much for listening.